Okay, so I'm going to start. Hi. So this week we're in Parashat Vaera, the second parasha in Sefer Shemot, and in this week's parasha, there's a lot of things that go on, and I have to be honest, this was one of the hardest shirim that I prepared because there was just so many things that there's so much information and so many different things to read and learn about these parshiot and about as it connects to Pesach and the building of the nation, and there's just so much that it was just there's so much on all Torah obviously, but just I felt a little overwhelmed this week with a lot of things I was reading and just had to fit it all in. And I really hope that I chose and could please God convey an important message. So with that preamble, let's begin. In this week's parasha, we have the four lashonot of Geulah, right? That center us and are the mantra, so to speak, of the Exodus from Egypt, right? That we say on the Pesach holiday when we drink the wines, right? Right? We all know these. And I want to look into those and hopefully with using those as our base to sort of delve deeper into what it truly means to achieve Geulah. So the parasha is an immediate continuation from last week, right? So last week we are in this. Moshe gets chosen to help free the slaves. He ends up making things worse at the end of last week's parasha. They're in a terrible state of avodah, of servitude, and they're really not happy. They're really suffering. And this week's parasha, Vaera, opens up with us, so to speak, eavesdropping in a way on a conversation between God and Moshe. And in this conversation, God reminds Moshe about the brit that he has, or maybe not, or reminds and elaborates on the brit with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and how this brit is, deeply connected to the land. And we saw constantly through Sefer Bereshit, right, how we have the promise of Zera, of offspring, and Aretz, land, right? We see this constantly with something that we kept seeing through Sefer Bereshit. And here in the beginning of Sefer Shemot, last week we saw very clearly. I'll just bring the Pesukim. Hold on, I'll share the screen a second. 1 second. Okay, here. That I'll go back to in a second, right? Last week we saw Bnei Yisrael paru ve'ishatzu ve'yirvu ve'yitzu me'od me'od v'timalei ha'aretz otam, right? They multiplied. There was a ton of offspring, and no matter what Paro and the Mitzrayim tried to do, and they weren't able to stop this. So we see that has is being fulfilled at this point, the promise of Zera, but we still don't see the promise of land, right? And so now God is basically telling Moshe, I'm going to fulfill my side of the Brit and go back to this Brit and bring you out of Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. So how's he going to do this? He basically sets out a framework of how he's going to do this with the Lashonot of Geulah, right? Wait, what is it? There we go. Okay. Where are we? Here. So here we have Lachen and Bnei Yisrael, tell them, I will take you out of the servitude and the suffering that of Mitzrayim, the stronghold of Mitzrayim, meaning I will practically, physically remove you from this horrible situation, right? I'll get you out. I will save you from the servitude. Not only will I get you out of the situation short term, I will make sure you are saved from it even in the long term. This is going to be over and done. You're not going to be slaves anymore. That I want to leave for a second. We're going to skip over that for a second and we'll go back. I didn't forget about it. I will take you as my nation. Vayiti lachem Elohim, and I will be your God. Vayedatem ki ani Adonai lachem, amotzi etchem mitachat tzivah Mitzrayim. You will know that I am your God, that took you out of Mitzrayim. And some say this is the fifth Geulah. It's connected to the third, to the fourth. Either way, this is the the knot that ties it all together. And I will bring you to the land that I chose to give to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. You will get it as an inheritance. I am God. Okay, so if we look for a second, and we can obviously go back, but if we look for a second at what God is saying without the idea of the vega'alti, without the third verb, it seems like a pretty good deal. What do I mean? You take me out of my horrible situation. You make sure I don't go back. You save me, and you make me your nation and bring me to this land where you protect me and fulfill this brit, right? And we have this covenant and this continuity, right? In like a lineage. And so why and what does the Ga'alti add to this story? Because it seems like without it, we would be pretty okay, right? So what is this Bega'alti, right? Bega'alti translates to redemption, okay? And what is redemption, right? So redemption translates, I actually Googled the actual dictionary definition. I wanted to like really zone in on that for a second. And it had two parts. It had action, the action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil, right? So it has it's showing that you're saved from a bad situation, which obviously will be part of this, right? Or regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment or clearing a debt, or gaining something back that you had lost or clearing a debt that you owe. So how is this going to fit into getting out of Egypt? Okay. And I think if we continue and go through the story here, we're going to see how both levels are important here. And if you look, it says, how is he going to redeem you? With an outstretched strong hand and a lot of different signs. And this translate as the makot, right? The 10 makot. So let's see what's going on here. The Bnei Israel, right? Not the Bnei Israel are in a very stop sharing for a second. The Bnei Israel are in a very traumatic situation right now, right? Meaning this whole story, right? They're slaves. They've been enslaved for years at this point, and they're being tortured on many levels. The Midrashim bring in not only on physical levels, on mental level, right? There's all different levels that they're being tortured on. And one of the levels, which I want to focus on for a minute, is the fact that Mitzrayim the Egyptians killed their their male children, their sons. And I saw a very, very interesting take on this through Rabbi Foreman of Aleph Beta, who brings in his own interpretation through some ideas of the Ramban, Nachmanides as well. And I want to sort of use that a little bit as a springboard and connect this all, hopefully. So what does he say? He says that the killing of the sons was done in a way that made it even more traumatic than you would even think possible, right? Killing someone's son is obviously traumatic enough, but the way it went about, according to the Ramban and Rabbi Foreman's understanding of this, was that what would happen, that it wasn't that Paro would send out the soldiers and the army to go gather all the sons and kill them in a mass grave and be done with it and make a whole spectacle of it. Like if you think similarly to other atrocities like of Nazi Germany, where they had mass graves and people stood there and they shot them into the graves. It wasn't like that. What did they do? They threw the babies into the Nile, right? And it wasn't necessarily soldiers. The Ramban interprets that it was general lay people, civilians, that would go and kidnap these babies and throw them in the river, in the Nile. And why? Like, what about that was made? It makes this even more horrible than it had to be. Was that it was all done in secret in a way, and when the Jews would say these people are kidnapping our kids and throwing them in the river, and they would say, but what are you talking about? There's no proof of that. How do you know? And then so not only would these families have this trauma, but this trauma would be covered up, making it even harder for this to go through. And even if you don't want, I want to just like say this even if you don't want to go on that perush, right? and if you want to look even in a more pshat way, right? The fact that they chose whoever it may be or however they did it, that it was thrown in the Nile, it was it's a huge river, and it would cover itself up, and you just look that someone lost their child and looks at the river, but the river looks as nice and calm and cool as every other day, and the Mitzrim are relaxing by the river just as, as if nothing happened. So whether they were actively trying to cover it up, whether it was a campaign, but the Nile itself, just by its essence and existence and the way it runs, covered it up, as opposed to a different way of killing these children. So it was a very almost deceptive, or making this feel like it's even more of an injustice because it's so easy to explain away, right? Like there's no proof of it, there's no grave, there's no way you could look at it. So this whichever angle you want to look at it is extremely traumatic, and in a way, and the Nile is part of the crime, right? It makes the crime even worse and even more intense. So now let's jump back for a second, and if we look and we see and we look at the back at the Lashon Keula, right? God didn't need to do any of this. He didn't need to do makot. He didn't need to do any fanfare. He's God. He could have just literally said, "Bnei Yisrael, I'm taking you out," and took them out, right? He's God. He performed tons of miracles. There's all different interpretations of how many miracles were performed in Mitzrayim, how many on the sea, right? Al Yad Hayam, how many there was. All different interpretations of insane amount of miracles that were being performed throughout the whole exodus of Egypt. So why couldn't he have just done one and just got everyone out? Why, we don't think of this because we know the story, but really, why go through all the trouble, so to speak? Obviously, it's not trouble; he's God. But why go through this whole thing, this whole song and dance, if he could have just taken them out in 1 second? So, I think that it would, if he would have just taken them out physically, they might have been saved from the physical slavery, but the whole mental slavery and the victimhood and the trauma that they experienced would still be so deep, they wouldn't truly be free of the oppression and trauma they received. And their oppressor, the Mitzrim, would essentially still be fine and still be blame free and judgment free. And even if they left, they would find someone else to be slaves, right? They were an empire. So I think that this is where the Viga'alti comes, right? And this is what the plagues accomplish. The plagues are an education system, right? It's a crash course, so to speak, in allowing the Mitzrim to realize who God is. And what do I mean by that? Right? Constantly, I just brought one pasuk, but God repeats this through many times in the parasha and in next week's parasha. Vayid'u Mitzrayim ki ani Adonai. Mitzrayim will know that I am God. B'ntoti et yadi al Mitzrayim. I will put my hand out onto Mitzrayim. Ve'otzeti et bnei Yisrael mitocham, and I will bring out, release, redeem bnei Yisrael from them, take them out from them. So part of this is that God is wanting to teach the Mitzrim, teach the oppressors a lesson, and show them the Mitzrim had many gods, right? They believed in the sun, they believed in the Nile, they believed in Paro himself was a god, claimed to be a god to Mitzrim. The sheep we know was a god because the whole issue with Korban Pesach, which we'll talk about next week, right? So the Mitzrim had no trouble believing in gods, like things that had potential power. But what the problem was that when they believed that everything had power, there was no centralized. It was very easy for everyone else to see themselves as a god as well, Paro included. And when you see yourself as a god, what's the problem? You see yourself as someone who has no one to answer to. So if you're a god, like Paro saw himself, then I don't have to answer to anyone else. I could do whatever I want, which is subjugate and mistreat and oppress these people. And God is saying, no, I will show you through these plagues that you do not have the authority to do this. You are not God. You are not in the position of power that you think you have. And I will let you see that and show you that. So that's one side of the objective of the plagues. And another side of that is also, this is a lesson for Bnei Israel, showing them, yes, I see you, right? God is saying, I see you, right? He says, he heard their zakot, he saw what was going on, he sees them, and he sees the injustice and the abuse and all the horrible things they've been dealing with. And it's not okay that you are dealing with this, he's telling them through the plates, right? And not only will I get you out of the situation physically, right? Not only will I physically remove you from this horrible situation, but I will make sure that your oppressor will stand judgment and will pay the price, right? So if we see in Brit Ben Habetarim, when God tells Abraham, right, way back in the beginning of Bereshit, when he tells him that right, they'll be stranger, and they'll be subjugated and oppressed. V'gam et hagoy asher yavdun dan anochi, right? And don't worry, even though they're going to go through this trauma, I will let the nation that oppressed them stand judgment. They will not be out scot-free. And we see that this, and God is saying, I see your pain and I will commit to helping you heal, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally, from what that means to be a slave. Right. And I think that not going to go into this now because it's obviously a much larger thing. But if we look later on in Sefer Bamidbar, right, going through the whole experience of going through the desert is basically that healing process. Is that healing process of shifting us from a nation of slaves to a free nation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, but that's a much deeper thing for later in the Parshiot, in this study. Sorry about that. Now, okay, so I want to go back a minute and talk about why the first plague, what's the deal with starting this all with them. Okay, so we spoke a little bit about how the babies were thrown into the Nile, and the Nile was almost in a way, a part of this crime by covering it up. And we see that, well, before I go into that, the Nile was one of the gods of Mitzrayim, right? Like we said before. And it was a very logical god of Mitzrayim because it was literally life-bringing, because it was water. They drank the water. They used the water for their crops. It was a constant source of water. And it wasn't like, and God talks about this also later in the Torah, that it's not like Eretz Yisrael where we have to wait and pray for rain. There's always this constant source of water. And because of that, and so that was one of the reasons that we said that God sort of showing, yeah, you think this is a God? I'm the God that's gonna hurt your God, so to speak. So that sort of answers why the Nile was involved. But why Davka blood? Why specifically blood? God could have, I don't know, maybe made it overflow or maybe made it dry up, right? There's other things that could have happened that would have equally have hurt the Egyptians in terms of the ability of the Nile to bring life and sustain them. Why specifically did the water turn to blood? And I think that here we see that this is God very clearly saying to Bnei Israel, I see you. I see all the blood that the Nile was covering up by throwing your children in the Nile so that they don't see the blood and they don't see the heartache that they caused you. Now the Nile is exposing the horrors that it did, and exposing thus the Mitzrim that did those horrors. So let's take with that idea for a second and go back to the idea of Geulah and redemption and why it is needed and what it adds to the whole Exodus experience. So we said before, redemption is the action of saving or being saved from sin or evil. So yes, God is very clearly saving them from evil in this situation, as well as the action of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment or clearing a debt. So what were Bnei Israel able to gain as a process of this Yetziat Mitzrayim through the plagues? And essentially at the peak of this, at the Korban Pesach, which is next week, right? But what does this do? It helps them gain their freedom, and it helps them develop their status as the nation that God chose and builds a relationship with and has brit with, as well as not only are they gaining that special relationship and building on that relationship, but they are seeing that through that relationship, God is showing them that I will bring justice to you because I am on your side. And all the crimes that the Egyptians did will be brought to the table, and they will be taken to task. And I think this whole idea of us becoming God's nation and the brit and that relationship being such a key part to the redemption process is why the redemption is not fully over until we have autonomy in Eretz Israel. And that's the Heveti aspect, right? I will bring you. And we read on Pesach in the Haggadah, right? We read Hisha Amda, right? I bought the Hisha Amda here just so you could see. 1 second, I'll share again. Give me a sec. Okay. Hisha Amda, right? We say this in the Haggadah Pesach. Hisha Amda Lavotenu Lanu Shelo Achad Bilvad Amad Aleinu Chalotenu Ela Shebechol Dor Vador Amdim Aleinu Chalotenu Bakadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miadam. Okay, it's this is like unfortunately, the tagline of Judaism, right? Every generation, someone tries to kill us, and thankfully, God is our salvation, right? And this is the pattern of our life as Jews, right? Constantly. But at the end of the day, the Geulah Shelema, right? The Geulah Shelema, the full Geulah will be when we have freedom in our land. Because even though we constantly are getting saved, right? Until we have freedom in our land and the other nations see that, and all the anti-Semitism and hatred and all the claims that this is not really our land and we're the problem and apartheid and all these, things that people say and constantly are being spewed on social media and all these, we're getting rockets thrown at us and we're sitting in our bomb shelters, but we're the problem because we're the oppressors, right? Like all this crazy backwardsness that we live in, all these, all these lies and cover-ups to make us feel like we're the problem. And those things will finally, hopefully, when Mashiach comes, will truly be exposed. And then we'll have our validation as a nation and be truly free. Now, I keep saying free. What does that mean for us to be free as a nation? So being free as Bnei Israel, as Israel, doesn't mean I could go around and do whatever I want. It means I'm an Eved Hashem. I'm not, right? God says, you're not Avdei Paro, you're my Avadim, right? So in this whole story of the Exodus, we transfer from Avadim of Paro to the Avadim of God, to the slaves of God, so to speak, right? The servants of God, slaves of God. So why does that make us free, right? Because if we are able to build a relationship with God and be an Or LaGoyim and help continue the Maaseh Bereshit and continue creating his world and bettering his world and being a partner with him in a world, that allows us to be free. That allows us to truly achieve our greatness, right? And this is done. I read a great line. I thought it really stuck with me. Oh my God, whose book was it? All right, Tversky, Torah. He says that we have to be realize we are God-like, but not God himself. Okay, I just thought that was we're God-like, but not God himself. I don't know why I like that a lot, because it shows us that we have to achieve that balance, to realize that we have a Selim Elohim within us. We are God's partners. We are God's messengers in this world. We are God's, we are part of the Brit with God. And I think that's so where the Mitzrim, and especially Paro, lost it and they decided they were gods, that's where they get stuck and they become the problem. But if we realize we're God-like but not God, right? And again, if we really want to go all the way back to Briat Haolam, right? This was Adam and Chava's problem as well, right? They started to think that they would have this control and could do whatever they wanted. They were like gods. So I think that it's a constant challenge for us to balance that, and it's not something that we only have to deal with in our relationship with ourselves, but I think it's also in our relationship with others. Because what do I mean by that? Because when we look at every person as being godlike, as having Selim Elohim, and ourselves as having Selim Elohim, we are able to respect and care and hear each other more, as opposed to fighting and fighting with each other more, and seeing I think the need, right, to have to be right, and to fight for think that, oh, they're always wrong and I'm right, that also becomes a little bit narcissistic sometimes, right? And we have to not see ourselves that we're always right. No, we always should be open to learning, and seeing different viewpoints, and building relationship, right? That's the biggest thing. And I think that's something that we all have to achieve to, and something that we need help in it. And yes, we do need the God aspect of it, in terms of God helping us in those positions, and that's what we pray for, right? We pray for God to give us that help. And I just want to end with this. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I couldn't pass this parasha without saying this pasuk, because it's something that you overlook, but I think it's so important to talk about. And hopefully we'll tie this all together. It says, when Moshe and Aharon were going to Paro, and this whole process of the makot and the redemption, it says Moshe ben shmonim shana. Moshe was 80, and Aharon ben shalosh ushmonim shana. And Aharon was 83. He was 3 years older than Moshe. And b'dvaram el Paro, when they went to speak to Paro. And I think this is it seems like such an innocent pasuk, like, okay, he's telling us how old they are. But like, think about that for a second. They were 80 and 83. They lived a very big, significant portion of their life, right? Even though, yes, they lived into their hundreds, but they lived majority of their life so far, right? They lived another 40 years, right? Moshe lived to 120. I'm blanking on how old Aharon was, but he was a little bit younger than that. I'm blanking right now. But they lived, another 30, 40 years, but they lived a substantial amount of their life up to this point. But yet this is what they're known for. So I thought that was just such a motivation, in the sense of, it's never too late. It's never too late to work on yourself, to achieve something great, to build this relationship with yourself, with God, with the people around you. And I think we have to, through that pasuk of really seeing what, that these were not, young people starting off and, oh, let me, do this and build this company or whatever. No, these are people that lived a good portion of their life and achieved many, many things. But the thing that we know about them, that's spoken about, for Pesach, every generation, every time we read this keeps being spoken about, and what they're known for was done in the latter part of the very, latter part of their lives. So I think that's just a really big, chizuk, and a big motivation for us. No matter what your age is, that you always have potential to build relationships and to build yourself, and it's never too late. So I hope that gives us all the ability to really try to not only work on redemption as a nation, which is obviously a much larger task, but to also work at our own internal redemptions, and seeing what things are holding us back, what limiting ideas and limiting beliefs and enslavements do we put on ourselves, in a way, right? A lot of time, the people holding us back are ourselves, right? In this case, right, in the story of Mitzrayim, we see that, yes, the Mitzvim were the physical oppressors upon us, but because of them, our mentality was so shut down that we ended up feeling, we couldn't even imagine a life out of Mitzrayim, right? It says that Moshe and Aaron went and they tried to motivate Bnei Israel and tell them God's with them, and they didn't believe them because of the work, of how hard the work was. And I think that you could take that to any level on any person's life. I don't think you need to be physically, I mean, obviously, if you're physically enslaved or in a physically harmful situation, it's going to be much, much harder. But even if you're not in that situation, we could mentally enslave ourselves and lock ourselves in to certain things and feeling distraught and not feeling able to get out of them. And that's a very sad place to be, and a very hard place to get out of. And that's why sometimes the ve'oseti ve'tzalti and the ve'lakachti, right? Sometimes the physical removal of those things is not enough. And that's why the Ga'alti is so crucial and is such an important piece of the puzzle, because if we are not mentally and freed and vindicated and redeemed in those ways, we still would stay stuck in the mentality. And that, I think, goes also to something we say in the Haggadah, which is which is also something we overlook, that we keep saying and saying and saying, that if God, in the Avadim Hayinu, that we were slaves to Paro, right? It says, right? That if God didn't take us out, we would still be slaves. And what does that mean? There's been many slaveries amongst all the years and cycle of human history, and people have gotten freed. But if they're not properly freed with Geulah, with the proper redemptive processes, right, then they will always stay slaves in their mind and always stay stuck. So I wish us all, all freedom. And I just think it's interesting. I'll just end with this. I don't really have much of a point about lightnings. I don't think it's such a, whatever. I just found it interesting. Is that Pesach is always in the spring, right? A time of renewal, a time of hope. Physically, right? Again, physically, we see the spring is starting. It's beautiful. The weather's nice, and we're reading this parasha in the middle of winter. It happened to be a really rainy, gross week the past week. So you just feel that, and when you feel that way, you don't feel motivated, right? I remember, many times this past week, I'd be texting my friends like, oh, I have so much to do, but I just don't feel motivated. I just want to get back in bed because this weather is so gross and just so cold and nasty out. But when it's beautiful and you have the physical, weather changing, you want to jump out and be productive and enjoy and do everything. So I just think it's interesting to see that juxtaposition of reading these redemptive and freeing parshiot when it's during the winter. I just thought that was interesting for me personally. I don't know if that anyone else resonated with, but that was just my take. Yeah, that's I think we'll wrap it up there. And next week we'll talk about the final plagues and actually physically getting out of Mitzrayim. So yeah, thank you.